What's the creepiest unsolved mystery? So this video is sort of a modern crime history compilation. It gets kinda graphic right away, so consider yourself warned. Happened during the football championship 2006 in Germany. A girl named Frauke Liebs was watching a game with friends and texting her roommates not to worry, she would come home late. After leaving the pub at around 11 PM, no one ever saw her alive again. Now the strange part, in the following week she texted and called a friend and her parents stating that she's alright and will come back soon, although with her unusual sleepy voice. At her last call she accidentally said yes when her sister was asking if she's been held against her will and instantly correcting to a no. This was the last time someone heard of her. Her body was found in the woods close to where she disappeared 3 months later with no indication who her killer is. Okay, so maybe creepy to me at least. When I was 5 my dad didn't come to pick me up at the weekend as usual. My parents had been divorced for a few years, but we are on relatively good terms and co-parenting by all accounts. The next day my mom took me round because I was upset and she was pissed off. No answer at the door, but his car and work van were on the drive. She still had a key to the house, so let us in to find everything in place. His wallet and keys on the kitchen table, dog in his bed. She fed the dog and went back home. After a couple of days still no contact, so she went back round. Everything was just as she found it last time. All belongings and clothes there, his bags and suitcase still in the cupboard, just a hungry dog. She took the dog back with her and spoke to his side of the family. No one had heard from him for about a week, but nothing out of the ordinary. A mutual friend at his work said he hadn't been in for a week either, and their boss was furious. She called the police and reported him missing. They found no clues. His wallet, keys, and cars all at the house. His passport was in the drawer. His petty cash stash of about £500 was where it was always kept. No signs of struggle. No signs of his bank accounts hadn't been touched for a week. And no out of the ordinary or large transactions or withdrawals over the previous months. Long story short, they found nothing and eventually shelved the case, and 23 years later still no contact with any friends or family. His parents and brother have all since passed away, never knowing what happened. The body in boiler stack 9. Basically some maintenance workers found a well-cooked body in the stack of a boiler in the steam plant at a paper mill. Nobody knows who it was, but there are signs that he died very slowly. He was found with his clothes off and wrapped around his feet and hands, as if to protect himself from the searing hot metal. The theory is that he was exploring during the weekend when the boiler was off, got stuck, and was unable to alert anyone before they started the boilers back up the following week. The body had been in there for months by the time he was found. The disappearance of Brian Shaffer. In 2006 an Ohio State student went into a bar and never came out. He was out with 2 friends one night and they went to a bar. This bar had a front main entrance and a back entrance for staff/entertainment, both of which had cameras on them. Brian is seen on camera entering the bar and then later stepping out of the bar to talk to a couple girls before going back in. Minutes before the bar closed and they were preparing to leave, Brian told his friends he was going to go talk to the band. Brian walked away out of sight and his friends waited for him, but he was never seen again. This was not a large bar, and the band doesn't remember talking to him, and the cameras never caught him exiting the bar. No one knows what happened to Brian after he walked away from his friends, or how, or if he left the bar. This is all from memory, but I really suggest looking more into this one, because there are a lot more details that make it even more baffling. There are many things that could both point to and away from Brian disappearing intentionally. It's such a wild case. One of the things I remember that I thought was really interesting was that an FBI agent who was specialized in facial recognition spent a long time analyzing the security footage and watched every person who came out of the bar. He never identified Brian leaving, but years later, after he had stopped working on it, he was at an Ohio State football game and saw someone across the crowd that he couldn't help but think looked very much like Brian. It was so similar to Brian that the guy had to go and talk to him. It turns out it was Brian's brother. That's how good this guy was. The Beaumont children deserves a mention. 3 kids in Adelaide South Australia who went down to the beach in 1966 and never came back. They were seen talking to a man and then walking around the suburb, but that's it. Never came home, never found, nobody ever arrested, police still following tips and digging for bodies more than 50 years later. Kids were like 9, 7, and 4. All three just vanished. Parents refused to move from the house for a very long time in case they ever came home. Does my head in? Anthonette Cayedito's kidnapping. She let her kidnapper in after he said that he was Uncle Joe, where they threw her into a van. The creepy part is a year later, someone called 911 claiming to be her, and someone shouts in the background who said you could use the phone. And a struggle is heard before the call cuts off. Anthonette's mom said that she was sure it was her daughter's voice. Then 4 years later, a girl matching Anthonette's description was acting strange in a diner and left a note on a napkin that said please help, call police. She's still missing, and she went missing in 1986. The Bodom Lake murders. In 1960 in Finland a group of 4 teenagers went camping near of Lake Bodom. 2 girls both aged 15 and 2 guys both aged 18. At night 3 of them were killed, and the only one of the boys survived. Their bodies and the horribly injured boy were found a few hours before noon. The badly injured boy was laying on top of the bloody tent. If you search for pictures of the tent, you can see that it's completely drenched in blood. The boy was not fully conscious and had several fractures in his skull. He survived and is still alive today with no memory of what happened. The police tried everything to find out what happened. Later in 2005 the survivor was accused of being the murderer. I however do not believe this to be true. Some of the teen's possessions were taken, wallets, shoes etc. Some were later found in the forest 500 meters away. With the injuries he had, walking that distance would have been impossible. Also, why come back to the crime scene? There was also no way this boy could have caused himself injuries to the back of the head. Also, some items like the leather jacket from the boy that died still haven't been found. To search for the murderer, the largest manhunt in Finland's history was conducted. 88 searched criminals were found in the forests of Espoo as a result, but not the murderer. There were multiple sightings of a light-haired man walking nearby the crime scene before and after the crime. He was never found. Asha Degree. 10-year-old girl got up in the middle of the night, packed her backpack and left home. A year later her backpack was found buried inside a duct tape bag, 30 miles away in a construction site. She was seen multiple times walking alongside of a road during the stormy night. Disappearance of the Sodder children. Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder family home in Fayetteville, WV burned to the ground. There's the father, George, the mother, Jenny, and 9 children. 4 of the children escaped, but 5 were believed to have died in the fire. Then, during the search of the burned house, none of the children's remains were found. The fire was nowhere near hot enough to burn through bone, but not a trace of them were found. Here's the freaky stuff. 2 months before, a visiting salesman told George his house would go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. The salesman attributed this to George's dirty remarks against Mussolini. George, an Italian immigrant, had been outspoken against Mussolini, which angered some in his Italian-American community. Another visitor later told George that his fuse boxes would cause a fire someday. This was after George just had his electricity rewired and inspected to be safe. In the weeks before Christmas, the older Sodder children noticed a car following them through the main town as they walked home from school. During the night of the fire, Jenny was awoken by a strange phone call after midnight, asking for a name she did not know. At 1 a.m., Jeannie heard a loud banging on the house's roof, but went back to sleep when she did not hear anything further. Half an hour later, she smelled smoke. The fire seemed to start near the fuse box. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children who had been sleeping downstairs escaped the house. They yelled to the children upstairs, but heard no response. The fire had already been engulfing the staircase, so they could not rescue them. George tried to go outside, around the house, to use ladder, to climb the window to the attic and rescue the children. But the ladder was not in its usual place. It would be found 75 feet away in an embankment. Then George tried to drive both his truck to the window, then climb them. but neither truck would start, despite both having worked the previous day. Later, a telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had initially thought, but cut by someone. The driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. Other witnesses claimed to have seen the children themselves. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Years later, in the 60s, Jeannie found in the mail a letter addressed to her, postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a picture of a young man around 30 with features strongly resembling Lewis, who would have been in his 30s if he had survived. On the back was written, Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie, I lil boys. A 90, 132 or 35. The Sodders never stopped believing their children were alive, and Jeannie wore black in mourning every day for the rest of her life. That was rather grim. Take care of each other in the comments.